Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
Welcome to Crosspointe.
We are an inclusive faith community
seeking to live out the loving, just, and generous way of Jesus.
We are participants in a long tradition
that's less concerned with doctrines and dogma that demand total agreement,
but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others.
What unites us is a growing awareness that life is precious.
That we are made by love in order to love.
This community is comprised of and affirms the entire human family.
Regardless of race, age, creed,
physical abilities, marital or economic status,
gender identity, or sexual orientation.
So, if you're curious and have come to see,
if you are tired and have come to rest,
if you are grateful and have come to share,
if you are wounded and have come to heal,
if you're joyful and have come to celebrate,
if you are uprooted and have come to belong,
welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Welcome home.
Give light, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. All the earth will shout your praise. All hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. All hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Be still, my soul, the Lord is on your side. Bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to your God to order and provide. In every change, He faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, your best, your heavenly friend. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, your God will undertake to guide the future as He has the past. Your hope, your confidence, let nothing shake. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul, the waves and winds still know His voice who rules them while He dwells below. Be still, my soul. Be still. Be still, my soul. Be still. Be still, my soul. Be still. Be still, my soul, when dearest friends depart, and all is dark and in the veil of tears. Then shall you better know His love, His heart, who comes to soothe your sorrow and your fear. Be still, my soul, your Jesus can repay from His own fullness all He takes away. Be still, my soul. Be still. Be still, my soul. Be still. Be still, my soul. Be still.
There are many ways we collaborate with each other to be the church we're called to be and to serve how we serve. And our contributing financially is one of the most important of those ways. If you want to help fund and sustain what we get to do together, Go to crosspoint.org/contribute to see the many simple ways that you can do so. You can even text crosspointenc to 77977 to receive a link to get started now. Thank you for your partnership in the work we do together.
I have heard it in several sermons. I've seen it in countless memes. The sentiment that the Bible says, do not be afraid 365 times. So that's one biblical don't be afraid for every day of the year, except for leap year, of course, which the implication is we're permitted to abject terror on that 366th day. So let me just say, I understand the sentiment, but it's not true. I think it's less than 80 times that it says that, and it's always between like an angel and somebody freaking out that they're seeing an angel, or people who have no business being confident going into some conflict, and God tells them, don't be afraid. It's that sort of thing. But what I can tell you is not in there any amount of times is be afraid. Achieve fear and fear's unhappiness for me. Why doesn't it say that? Well, maybe because human beings don't have to be told to do that. Maybe it only makes sense to tell them not to do that. So before I get into what I'm going to get into today, I want to show you a piece of art. And I don't want you to try to figure out why I'm showing it to you. I just want you to pay attention as you look at this piece of art. I want you to pay attention to your thoughts and your feelings as you take it in. This piece of art is called Jesus the Liberator. Ready? I want you to look at that and think of our world, everything that's happening, and the awareness that Jesus has of all that, the awareness you'd expect him to have. Consider his first century Roman Empire context, where soldiers would go into villages and crucify all the men to make a statement about who keeps the peace around here. Imagine the mass poverty people are experiencing, and it's answered with this condescending bread and entertainment tours that they would put on to pacify people. Think of the political, the religious corruption. How in the world could we think of a depiction of Jesus laughing, losing it, is respectful? Yes, Jesus wept, and that's one of the most beautiful statements in all of the Bible, right? The Son of God weeps in the presence of grief. I mean, there's a million sermons about that. That's still not enough. But Jesus cackled. I mean, can you be the Son of God, strong and aware, capable and sensitive, and experience happiness like that in public? Isn't happiness in the midst of so much awfulness a sign of being a sociopath, or of not getting it, or maybe of having gone numb? My dad, he said after years of working as a cop, that there were often times where he and other officers at the scene and EMS, they'd find themselves laughing about something right in the middle of somebody else's worst day, death and pain and tragedy. And he said it would be days before he would look back and realize, when he did, that he was completely turned off. His insides were just turned off to protect himself from feeling the grief and the fear and all that. How can you know and stay truly attuned to what's really happening and live happily? Not even just globally, just in your own world. How can you be paying actual attention and be happy? Doesn't it seem like Hemingway was saying something true when he said happiness in intelligent people is the rarest thing I know? I mean, how many times have we repeated ignorance is where the bliss is? How many times have we equated cynicism and despair and doom with being the person who knows the most? So this drawing of Jesus, or white Will Forte as Jesus, in my opinion, it was done in 1973 by a guy named Willis Wheatley, and he had named it Christ the Liberator, but people started calling it the Laughing Christ, and that's the name that stuck. And I have heard this said, I can't promise you that this is true, but this may be the very first piece of art in history at least on any sort of popular scale, that depicts Jesus laughing. He's allowed to look stern, he can look unaffected and even a bit angry, but this is apparently the first time he's ever depicted as losing it. And I don't want to pretend like I know as a matter of science or the historical record, but in my interactions about this, going all the way back into the 90s, the little bit that I've read, this art moved people to joy to about the same degree, maybe a little less, to the degree that it moved people to discomfort and accusations of disrespect, blasphemy. Maybe you noticed a tension like that within yourself while you were looking at it. But maybe you've also noticed that the Bible never depicts God as laughing. The exceptions to this would be when God laughs as a taunt to oppose evil opposition. That's not joy, that's just mockery. God is not depicted as laughing out of happiness, out of joy. And you might think, well, that's a ridiculous thing to expect. It's God. But remember, God is depicted as expressing wrath and grief and frustration and jealousy and regret. But expressions of joy like laughter, that's not in there. That feels sort of undignified, less mighty somehow, less holy, right? And then I remember, well, wait a minute, Tony Soprano's mom couldn't experience joy. And that wasn't a trait that was being celebrated. I mean, imagine spending eternity with a being that can get super angry and jealous, but doesn't laugh. I mean, does that sound safe or fun forever? And yet, for some of us, thinking about a Jesus who laughs, who prioritizes and experiences joy, but then also supposedly knows and cares about what's really happening in your life and the world and all that, and is going to actually do something about it, those things don't square very easily. It feels wrong. And so I want to harp on this for a minute because there's a risk here of making this sound like I want us to feel bad about feeling bad instead of feeling good. That's not what this is. I'm going to try to provide a little bit of an aha moment that could lead to changes for people that'll be welcome. Because this same tension that I'm talking about, that some of us feel, it's the same tension that some of us, it's why we feel guilty for being happy at all, for doing well. But we want to be doing well. And so we try to uphold a sense of disappointment and disapproval and anger and even cynicism, while also wishing we could be happy, that we had relief. I mean, this is why so many people post things on Facebook about how obscene other people can be, the racism and the misogyny, the abuse of vulnerable people, the lies, other people's unwillingness to do anything meaningful about climate change, the pillaging of the environment. Not because those things aren't real and true and that they don't need to be addressed. They're very real. But some of us, we do that, and that's all we do because we feel bad if we present ourselves as joyful too much. Because we feel it's like a duty, a responsibility to humanity and or to God to not be too happy, to not be content. Smart, morally serious people shouldn't have more joy in their life than just a pinch here and there. I mean, we call going to a funny movie a little bit of escapism. The real world isn't allowed to be like that, right? And we have good reason for thinking this. It's what we have been taught, directly and indirectly. But far more significantly and fundamentally, we haven't been taught this. It's a reflection of how we're actually made. And what I'm saying is, the sense that we are being the most serious about reality when we're keeping things kind of negative, when we're focused on what's wrong, that's not a belief system we got from a book. It's actually how we're designed. It's just that many of us are stuck over deploying this instinct to the point where happiness feels reckless. Joy is a liability. It somehow communicates that we're not paying attention. And when we live that way, we're actually just multiplying suffering rather than addressing it. We have in our nervous systems a very normal, helpful, even good and necessary negativity bias. It's not something we consciously choose. It's our brain and nervous system's job to take in all the sensory data of our environment and give more weight to the bad stuff. I mean, think about it. You walk into a bank, two people walk in behind you. One is a lady in a dress, the other is a man in a ski mask. What color is the lady's dress? Who freaking cares, right? I'm not scared of snakes, but if I'm walking in the woods and a huge snake-shaped stick suddenly appears on the trail beneath my foot, I get a big boost of adrenaline. I gasp sometimes. I go into a little bit of fight or flight, even though consciously, intellectually, I'm not scared of snakes. I love them. The negativity bias and how fundamental that is, that bias for physical, emotional danger, that's for our survival. That's how we got here. It's perfectly normal. And yet, it's also why bad news goes on the front page and feel-good stuff goes up in a corner on page 6. I mean, imagine a newspaper that tried to sustain our attention and our subscriptions with all good stuff, happy stuff. It's been tried, it doesn't work. It's why you won't easily remember the 4 or 5 kind things that were said to you or near you today. You'll lay in bed tonight, though, thinking about that thing you said that was stupid and what that's going to cost you, or how that person, just for a fraction of a second, looked you up and down. And then, did they smirk? Why did they smirk? It'll haunt you. It's why some of us can't relax. Since childhood, we just say, I'm high-strung. We'd love to, but our bodies and our emotions are stuck on stay alert, just in case. Why? Because it's our bodies, far more significantly and influentially, that are more than our thinking minds, that assess threat and danger and discomfort and are trying to put together strategies to get away from it or get through it alive. And if you've been through some stuff, and I bet you have, then it's also your nervous system builds strategies that are attached to your history, what you've already been through. Whether that's logical or not, your nervous system says, we're not doing that again. Author Joseph Wynn said, our brains are programmed to scan our surroundings for potential dangers, and it excels at this task. Our minds don't only analyze the world in front of us, they also dredge through memories of past experiences and generate predictions about the future. So let's observe how this is not intellectual, this isn't logic for a second. I want you to watch this video. What do you feel in your body having watched that? I know you'd have thoughts and opinions like, is that even legal? And how did he get down? And maybe judgments about him being stupid or something like that. Maybe even envy. But how is your body responding apart from your logic, your thinking? Did you find yourself squirming watching that at all? Did you do the thing that I do sometimes where you moan in dread? Just, I didn't even mean to do that the first time I watched it. Did you find yourself needing to look away? Did your palms get wet? The end is what does it for me, when he gets to the top and then just turns around and crouches like an idiot gargoyle. Again, intellectually, you're watching a video, and you had a good sense that he's not going to fall. Pastor Steve isn't going to show us a guy falling off of a building, right? Your body, to some degree, was activated because it's very good at fear, very good at preparing for the worst, very good at dumping a whole bunch of stress and readiness hormones and chemicals into your body just in case the scary things could start happening to you. We're really, really good at this, apart from our thinking. It's two different things, the intellect and then the nervous system's negativity bias that focuses on and prepares for the worst, what's wrong, just in case. And while it maybe seems like bad news to hear that this is happening apart from our intellect, we're more shaped by negative things that happen to us than the positive. That's why we put so much energy into it. I mean, our train derailing for 9 or 10 seconds of terror will have far more effect on the rest of our lives than the week-long vacation we were coming back from on that train. That went really well. So it seems like bad news, but once you learn this about yourself, and not just intellectually, but you begin to see that integrating these disintegrated parts of ourselves, this is the work of those who want to be self-aware. We're not self-aware until we're doing it. To know thyself. This is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is how we can live in the real world, denying nothing, attuned with our anger and our grief, but also be living in sheer joy. Both. Because we're not living primarily from vigilant survival, although survival still runs in the background all the time. It's necessary. But primarily we live as people who are aware that love and joy, this is how we are demonstrating to ourselves and each other that living abundantly, which is what Jesus said he was here to lead us to do, that's far more true and profound and expansive and beautiful, far more a reflection of awareness than the invulnerable survival many of us have made a habit out of. By the way, check in with your body. It's been a few moments since we watched the video. Close your eyes if you need to. Do you still feel any tension from watching the climbing video we just watched? It's totally normal if there is. If you felt it, it's probably still there. Take a second, take a deep breath, and think about where is it showing up in your body right now. Just a little bit of tension. Now, if we ignore stuff like that, this is a small example, but let's use it. If we ignore this, like we almost always do, that I had a nervous system response, an emotional, activated response to something I just watched. How often do we carry that unacknowledged tension, that fight or flight, into a conversation? Where being reactive, being easily insulted, that's not going to help at all. How often are we carrying a body adrenalized in fight or flight to some degree, walking around with that and wondering, why is everything so tense and so hard? How often has our not learning to take care of our whole self, our nervous system, to take care of that as well as we would take care of our teeth or dry skin, and that is making us lose out on joy, on closeness, the fullness of living this life together, because we have such a practiced habit of focusing on what's wrong, the despair, the danger, because it keeps us safe to focus on that. Again, this is not primarily a conscious choice. There's no shame in this. This is not about character deficiency or bad religion. It's a human habit stemming from circumstances in our lives and in our common world, and they're not fiction. But most of us completely out of whack about this, and no one has taught us how to, I don't know, get back in whack? I'll regret that later. So when we say, I'm not being negative, I'm just being realistic, look around, that's not the whole truth, is it? And frankly, neither is it the whole truth when we act positive. When we insist, don't think about the negative, just be positive. Most of the time, that's the same thing. I mean, many of us act positive and put a positive spin on everything because we're terrified. It's just a different technique for being driven by fear. Performed joy can be just as much a joy killer as living in cynicism, fear. The more we exist in a state of sustained tension, the more we actually reshape ourselves according to danger and suspicion and narrowness and cynicism. And it's really tricky because it doesn't feel like fear necessarily, like haunted house, roller coaster fear. It might not feel like anything, but it's fear presented in our lives as a persistent focus on what is wrong within us and out there. That's how it works. Not because of bad character, not because of weak faith, but because quite literally the structure of our feeling, thinking self has been conformed to our over-deploying this negativity bias, to responding to a world based on what's wrong, the bad things that have happened and that might happen. And the science is in on this. There's no controversy here at all. Constant, unmanaged tension and stress without the intentional balance of joy and rest keep us full of these stress hormones, and it actually shrinks parts of our brain. And this leads to very measurable change in our ability to love, to trust, to learn new ideas and change our mind, to feel awe, to be able to think about the future, to experience intimacy and connection. It affects our ability to have a connected sense of faith that draws us forward. It affects our ability to have consistent values because we're more and more operating on impulse. Like I just need to forget the big picture and get relief right now. And so over all of this, happiness, joy are slipping further and further away. And we can't change how we're made, and we shouldn't, but we can absolutely learn to walk a path that remains honest about what's going on in life and prioritizes and radiates joy, internalizing it, expanding it, giving it full permission to be the major theme in our life as we integrate our different parts. And I'll admit, and have admitted, I struggle with this a lot. I didn't used to struggle with it. I still do. I used to and I still do. Thanks, Mitch Hedberg. Circumstantially, I struggle with this. And then as an effect of spending most of my life not understanding, you can't intellectualize yourself into happiness and healing if you carry this stuff in your body. And so I don't know if be ye not afraid is even possible for some of us, but I think it's possible for all of us to be ye not primarily afraid. You can, whether you're a dyed-in-the-wool, Jesus is my everything type, or a just the facts science geek, and I know you can be both, but you get my point. You can, in good conscience, give yourself to the work of expanding joy in this world, in this life as it is now. You have permission to prioritize being awake and aggrieved and angry at injustice and actively participating in setting things right, and whatever flipping tables looks like. But at the same time, prioritizing to a larger degree, enjoying the life that God has given us. Awe, laughter, tranquility in the world as it already is. Not waiting for it to change, but as it is now. The Apostle Paul told some desperate friends that the evidence that the animalistic part of us has taken over is obvious. And he says, you'll use each other, you'll behave like all you are is an appetite to be satisfied, you'll bow down to whatever promises you relief, there'll be hostility, nitpicking, jealousy. Then he says there'll be wrath, there'll be fighting, there'll be constant conflict, reducing everything to us versus them. There'll be envy, avoiding things by staying high and drunk. I'm warning you, as I warned you before, those who do such things won't inherit the kingdom of God. Which doesn't mean going to heaven. It means you're not going to live this kingdom of God life in the here and now. You're going to suffer. You're going to be miserable. Then he says, rather famously, by contrast, the fruit or the evidence of the Spirit is what? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. There is no law against such things. So forget for a second Paul didn't know anything about psychology or hormones or the central nervous system, and the fact that his language about all this is sort of simplistic and judgy. Do you see how in the real world, his context of pain, abuse of power, disappointment, sickness, misfortune, despair, that he knew as well as anybody could, the stuff that he'd been through would break most people. See how he puts fighting, hostility, an attitude that nothing matters, just get relief, cynicism, jealousy and wrath and conflict, making all disagreements us and them. He puts all that on the first list. The uninspired list, the small acting out of fear and tension list, the problems caused by merely trying to survive list. But then he says the fruit of the Spirit. the evidence that we're operating on the higher part of us. That wrath and fear, those things didn't make the list. Think about that. Think about how much time we've spent with wrath and fear as people of faith. It didn't make the list of the fruit of the Spirit. It made the first list. Ideas that some of us think are required by morally serious people, they didn't make the cut. Paul says then, and I believe the Spirit is still saying now, love in the world as you find it. Peace in the world as it is. Joy in this world as it already is. And not because anger and fear are negatives or are inappropriate, they're necessary, but because we have to be reminded about the whole other part of us, the far deeper, wider, truer parts of who we are. Paul's use of love, joy, and peace are predicated on the idea that people need to be reminded of the balance, then and now, you and I, because the assumption is we really want to make a conscious and communal effort to transcend fight, flight, and freeze. We want to live well. And I hope you know that I know if the only people that were saying this were able-bodied, straight white men in well-heated homes, this is bovine excrement. But Paul was saying it, and John was saying, Jesus said it. I mean, these truths precede and transcend all of us. Read through history and you find all these people who've lived under immense difficulty and pain and suffering, and they come through it honest about the world and yet full of joy, hope, awe. And we have permission to do likewise. A suffering St. Paul is credited with saying, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love and of clear thinking. And a guy named John wrote to a struggling, divided, despairing group of people. He said, God is love. There's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out, casts out fear, because fear has to do with punishment, avoiding punishment. The one who fears has not been perfected, not no mistakes, but hasn't been made complete in love. So know that I say this tiptoeing, not because it's untrue, but because it's easy to misunderstand. Joy is not a privilege. It's a gift that we can learn to give ourselves and others with or without the consent of our circumstances. And it starts with self-compassion enough to be working for your own joy and peace. How? Well, for today, let's think of ourselves as just getting started, if that's what we need to do, simply by deepening our self-understanding. And one good way to do this, I think, Dan Siegel has a really helpful way of understanding our brains, our nervous systems that function beneath our logic. And it's helpful not just for trivia night to understand this, but it helps us begin learning how to direct our attention to the parts of us that are activated at the expense of our higher self. And so knowing this actually helps us integrate these things. And understand, the research is clear. The best predictor of you and I doing well, of us enjoying our life, is knowing how to integrate all the stuff we carry in our bodies and our brains. So a basic model for understanding this is really handy. Hold up your hand, and again, this is Dan Siegel's work, not mine. If you think about your hand open like this, and this is your brain. If you open it up, this is your brain stem and the spinal cord that connects to the rest of the body. This is my watch. Think of it as a necklace, I guess. So this part of us is activated. There are no choices to be made. And you walk into a room and it's cold and your hair stands up on your body, you don't choose that. The brainstem does all of that. When you walk into a room and you feel danger and you're activated and you're ready to take action before you have any thought, that all happens down in the base of our brain. The limbic region, and as he explains, there should be two, but we'll just use the thumb. This is emotions. This is where motivation comes from, and our sense of attachment to each other comes from. This is where your hippocampus is, and the fear center of the amygdala and all that. And so this is connected to the brainstem. And so you can think of it as this is reacting to what's happening, and often this is about the meaning that we assign to that. If you spill a drink over onto the table, there's no that doesn't mean anything. It just happened. But the emotions you have about that, based on your learning history, might say, oh, I'm an idiot. You start to fear, oh, that's going to ruin the table. Somebody's going to be mad at me. All of that happens. Two different things happening like this. And so our emotions, our sense of motivation, all that's the limbic system. The cortex is like the mapping for all of that. This is, you've got on the back of the cortex, this is how you see and map the world visually. On the sides, this is where hearing happens, where you map the audio of the world. And then the prefrontal cortex you've heard of, and represented like by your last knuckles here, this integrates all of this data coming in. And so that's what we're using right now. And so when we get afraid, when we live in stress, when we live in fear, when that happens, it disintegrates all of this. And we start to live a little chaotically and negatively. We start to completely check out, or we lean in a little too hard. So mindfulness, breathing, prayer, pausing, Sabbath, rest. This is what integrates our creativity, opens the future back up, makes us feel like we have more options, helps us collaborate, sees the bigger picture, makes space for joy, thoughtful action, curiosity, compassion. And again, the best predictor of our well-being, of having rich relationships, happiness, hopefulness, it's learning to integrate these different parts, to have the awareness and the ability to regulate all of this stuff that happens inside of us before it turns into the habit of a negativity bias. But intellectually understanding this metaphor that's not going to do anything for us. I mean, it'll be fun to say, hey, I learned a thing at church today, fine. But knowing how to get good at pausing and directing our focus, how we notice that we're over deploying a negativity bias, to recognize fear and shame, the otherizing stories that pop up automatically, and what that's attached to. Noticing that our body is tense, and to stop saying, yeah, I'm just hyper, I'm just high strung. Or when we zone out or we keep procrastinating, to just say, well, I'm lazy, or I've got ADHD. But to really understand compassionately that our bodies are responding to things, that our thoughts and our feelings and our beliefs are following suit, that what we are responding to in our environment, whether it's logical or not, has gone all the way up the chain and we're not aware of it. So integrating ourselves by gradually learning to recognize and stop the inner criticism that turns into outer criticism because it's always focusing on what's wrong. Fear does that. Learning to recognize I'm actually safe, to learn to calm our bodies, to go into situations or meetings or conversations, and ahead of time, just take a second to be aware of what we're carrying. What are we anticipating? And to breathe well, to learn to get a sense of our whole self, heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is a gift to ourselves that we have permission to receive. Joy isn't a privilege. It's evidence that somebody is really serious about living abundantly in the here and now. And therefore, it's a gift from us to others. It frees us to live joyfully and creatively and ready to enter into the world with all of its ugly and all of its beauty, but attuned to the self and to the other. So what can this look like? A million different things, and we're going to explore that as a community. But I wanted to share with you my favorite recent example of what it looks like when a group of people who take this seriously, who are integrated, who are joyful and yet attuned, like really deep humanity. I want to share with you my favorite example of this recently. I want to read to you the first part of a Sojourners article written by Moya Harris this last week, February 13th. In December 2020, white supremacists marched through Washington, D.C., defacing our church's Black Lives Matter sign. This wasn't just vandalism, it was an act of terror, a deliberate attempt to silence a black church. Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church, that has long stood for justice. But fear has never had the final word in our tradition. I won't lie, though, we were unsettled. I'll never forget when my pastor, Reverend William H. Lamar IV, shared the news with our waiting congregation. We were at the height of the pandemic, before vaccines, navigating an online worship reality with no clear end in sight. My mind flashed to cross burnings in the rural South. I wasn't surprised, but I was angry and tired. My pastor stood firm, reminding us that God is still with us. He didn't flinch when he said we will not be silenced, and we weren't. We did not cower. We did not retreat. Instead, we kept doing what we have always done, worshiping, liberating, and serving, trusting in a God who bends the arc of the universe toward justice. We remained steadfast in our calling as the Cathedral of African Methodism, refusing to lose heart in the face of white supremacy. In June 2023, Metropolitan AME successfully sued the Proud Boys, winning a $2.8 million judgment through default judgment for trespassing and vandalizing our property. But because they have yet to pay, our church creatively sought to ensure payment by stripping the hate group of its trademark, meaning they can no longer sell merchandise to fund their hate, unless our church allows it. Any profits the Proud Boys earn from using the trademark must be paid to Metropolitan to help fulfill the multi-million-dollar default judgment. A black church now holds the legal rights to the identity of those who sought to intimidate it. This is more than a court decision. It is a reversal of power in the tradition of Jesus. Now, tell me that doesn't sound like a way to live, to love joyfully, creatively, seriously, honest about danger and fear, but fully in the real world. On their website, Reverend William H. Lamar IV, he signs his communications, joy and justice, and then his name. My friends, we have permission to be happy and to heal and to let our love outsize our fear and to be at peace. And so may we believe it from the cortex to the brainstem, the joy and the justice, the love and the laughter of Jesus. I'll close with a poem by Lauren Brantz. In a time of hate, love is an act of resistance. In a time of fear, faith is an act of resistance. In a time of misinformation, education is an act of resistance. In a time of poor leadership, community is an act of resistance. In a time like this, joy is an act of resistance. Resist, resist, resist.
If you would like to know more or get connected to Crosspointe, go to crosspointenc.org. If you're in need of care or assistance, go to crosspointe.org/care. And welcome home.